If the leaders at Wounded Knee are bent on violence, that is their concern. But I call upon them now to send the women and the children, both resident and non-resident, out of Wounded Knee before darkness falls tomorrow.
The United States government sent an ultimatum to the people in Wounded Knee that if they didn't leave on a certain day that they were coming in, they would remove us by force.
We are going to reject any kind of conditions that pushes us out of the Wounded Knee area until all of the issues of the Oglala Sioux are met.
I told Dennis, just burn it. And at that time, we all started making preparations for making that last stand.
We smudged everybody as they came up and painted them. When you go off to war, if you get killed in battle, then the paint will signify that you went there with the blessings of the pipe, and that you will go to the spirit world with great honor.
I had this little bitty bag, little bitty fringes on it. I had one bullet in there, and I had a semi-automatic, and I only put one bullet in there, and somebody said, how come one bullet? I said, I'm going to wait, because if I'm going, I'm going to take somebody with me.
The gunman just backed down on that 6 o'clock thing.
Beautiful.
2 days after issuing the ultimatum, U.S. officials shifted tactics. Hoping the occupation would simply peter out, they removed roadblocks around Wounded Knee and persuaded Dick Wilson to remove his. Federal officials would keep the inflammatory tribal chairman on the sidelines for the rest of the occupation. But when the roadblocks were lifted, new protesters and fresh supplies flooded in. On March 11th, revitalized occupation leaders made a startling announcement.
The leadership of the Oglala Sioux here present in Wounded Knee have declared Wounded Knee an independent country. From here further, if any spy from the United States of America is found within our borders, they will be dealt with as any spy in a time of war and be shot before a firing squad.
The battered hamlet of Wounded Knee was now the independent Oglala Nation. While U.S. officials hurriedly put roadblocks back in place, the new nation asserted its sovereignty. A delegation led by Chief Foolscrow traveled to the United Nations to put the Oglala's case before the world.
They arrived almost an hour late. They said taxi cab drivers just wouldn't stop to pick them up. Wearing a medal given to the tribe by the United States government after the signing of the Treaty of 1868, 78-year-old Chief Foolscrow, through an interpreter, explained why the group came to New York.
It is our last effort in this trouble. I think we have exhausted all other means of a settlement of the trouble we have at Wounded Knee.
The delegation failed to get official recognition at the UN and returned to Wounded Knee. There, inside the borders of the independent Oglala Nation, the chiefs and medicine men introduced Lakota culture to the protesters, many of whom had come from cities and were disconnected from Indian traditions.
One of the first things that we did when we got in the Wounded Knee is we built a purification lodge, a NEPI, sweat lodge. And we all were required, everybody was required to go in there and purify themselves and to pray and ask the Creator for help. Everything that we did was preceded by prayer and gathering, smoking of the sacred pipe and tobacco offerings, everything.
The Indian movement was different than other political movements of the time because it defined itself as a spiritual movement.
their trajectory in a way mirrors what a lot of the Indian world was about, which was trying to connect with traditional knowledge, culture, religion.
One of the things that AIM tried to do was to return Indianness to all Indians, whether folks lived in the city, on reservations, whether they spoke the language or didn't speak the language. If you were Indian, you could return to the tribe.
Many of the protesters had left reservations behind, along with thousands of other Indians, as part of the federal government's Indian Relocation program of the 1950s and 60s.
The government thought one way to solve the Indian problem was to relocate Indians from the reservation to the bigger cities. They couldn't kill the Indians anymore. That was out of fashion by the 50s. So they decided to experiment. They did a lot of experimenting with Indians. Relocation program was one such experiment.
It was exciting, relocation. You know, you get to go to a big city and they'll help you find a job, and you'll get to, you know, see the rest of the country. Of course, you weren't forced to go on relocation, but they made it look good. Streets paved with gold. We ended up in Cleveland, Ohio.
Over 100,000 Indians were relocated in just 15 years. The government promised to help them find schools, housing, and employment. But for many, the promise rang hollow.
They put us in a real dumpy motel, and I was just sitting there thinking, I wonder what's going on at home. I could just see the rolling hills and the small town. They're all just moving and walking and going real fast, and nobody's stopping to look around. That's why we stayed in our apartments or stayed in our rooms.
If you went and applied for a job, you better not tell them you're Indian. You better tell them you're French or you're some Italian or some other nationality. You wouldn't get the job.
By the 1970s, half of all Indians lived in cities. But the relocation program produced an unanticipated result.
It pulled us all closer together. We could always spot each other in the city. So if we'd see an Indian on the street, walking down Market Street, we'd look at each other and we'd just smile and kind of shake our head, or, you know, an acknowledgement of each other. We didn't care what tribe anyone was. We were Indian people. We were a race.
The new pan-Indian identity led to the growth of activist groups around the country. The American Indian movement was the most radical.
There were a lot of native people that were afraid to stand up. Geronimo demonstrated, man. Crazy Horse demonstrated. And for us, the baby boom generation, circumstances were right. We could raise our voice.